It was a bright Saturday evening, the kind of evening that felt perfect for a small celebration. The luxury restaurant at the heart of the city was filled with the soft glow of chandeliers, the gentle clinking of wine glasses, and the quiet murmur of conversations from wealthy guests who were enjoying their night out. Waiters moved gracefully across the polished wooden floors, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive dishes. The air smelled of roasted herbs, grilled meats, and freshly baked bread. It was a place where only the elite of society usually dined, a place where even the chairs and tables seemed to whisper about wealth and privilege. At one of the entrances, a young black schoolboy stood with his father. The boy was no ordinary child in terms of his determination and his dreams. He had worked hard in school, earning top grades despite the many challenges he faced. Today was special. His father had promised him a dinner to celebrate his success. For the boy, this was not just a meal. It was a reward, a memory he would cherish, and a reminder that his efforts mattered. The boy wore his best clothes, a crisp white shirt and a neatly tied blue striped tie. His father, tall and dignified, stood beside him in a tailored suit, his strong hands resting gently on his son's shoulders. Together they entered the restaurant, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. As they walked toward their reserved table, the boy felt the curious glances from some diners. He noticed the way some people shifted uncomfortably, while others pretended not to notice them at all. He had felt this before, the unspoken judgment, the invisible wall that seemed to rise between him and others simply because of who he was. But tonight, he pushed those feelings aside. He wanted to enjoy this evening with his father. They reached their table, a corner spot near the golden drapes where the chandeliers cast a warm light over the polished cutlery and the sparkling glasses. The father smiled at his son. "This is your night," he said softly. "You've earned it." The boy grinned back, feeling proud. He pulled out his chair and sat down, his heart racing with excitement for the meal to come. But just as he settled in, a waiter approached. The man was tall, sharp-faced, and carried himself with the air of someone who believed he owned the room. Instead of greeting them politely, his eyes narrowed as he looked directly at the boy. The waiter's lips curled into a smirk. "Excuse me," he said in a voice that was loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "I think you're in the wrong place." The boy blinked, unsure of what the waiter meant. "This is our table," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. The waiter frowned, his eyes sweeping over the boy's school uniform. "No," he said firmly. "This is not a place for kids like you. This is a luxury restaurant. You don't belong here." The words hit the boy like a slap. His heart sank, and he felt his cheeks burn with humiliation. Around them, diners began to turn their heads. Some whispered to each other while others stared openly, their expressions mixed with curiosity and discomfort. The room, which had been filled with soft laughter and music moments ago, now felt heavy with silence. The boy looked at his father, his eyes pleading for reassurance. He wanted to believe he was not hearing what he thought he had just heard. His father's jaw tightened, but he placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "We have a reservation," he told the waiter calmly. "Kindly bring us the menu." But instead of obeying, the waiter chuckled mockingly. "A reservation? Here? Don't waste my time. This is not a fast food joint. We serve people who can actually afford to be here." His voice dripped with arrogance, and each word felt like a dagger aimed at the boy's pride. The boy's chest tightened. He wanted to disappear under the table, to escape the stares of the other guests. He had dreamed of this evening for weeks, but now, in just a few cruel moments, it was turning into a nightmare. He wondered if maybe the waiter was right. Maybe he really didn't belong here. But his father's calm presence kept him steady. The man did not raise his voice or lose his composure. He simply held his son's hand under the table, squeezing it gently as if to say, "Don't you dare believe him. You belong wherever you choose to be." The waiter, still sneering, crossed his arms. "Listen, I don't want to cause a scene," he said, though his voice was already carrying across the room. But you need to leave before I call security. This restaurant has standards. We don't just let anyone sit here. The boy's eyes watered, though he tried to hide it. For the first time in his life, he understood the deep pain of being judged, not for who he was, not for what he had achieved, but for something he could not change. His father finally stood, towering over the waiter. His voice was low, but commanding. "You've made a mistake," he said. "And one day you'll regret the way you treated my son." The waiter scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, I doubt that," he muttered. But at that moment the boy noticed something shift. Other diners who had been watching silently now began whispering more urgently. Some looked shocked, while others shook their heads in disapproval, not at the father and son, but at the waiter's cruelty. A woman at a nearby table murmured, "That's disgusting. How could he speak to a child like that?" The boy's heart pounded. He wasn't sure what would happen next. All he knew was that this night, which had started as a celebration, had now become a test of dignity, strength, and the quiet power his father always carried within him. The father sat back down slowly, his eyes locked on the waiter. "Bring us the menu," he repeated, his tone sharper this time. The waiter hesitated, clearly surprised that his words had not driven them away. But instead of obeying, he turned on his heel and walked briskly toward the manager's office, his face red with annoyance. The boy leaned toward his father. "Dad, maybe we should just go," he whispered, his voice trembling. His father looked at him, his eyes softening. "No," he said firmly. "You deserve to sit here. You deserve to be treated with respect. And tonight, you will see something important." The boy didn't understand what his father meant, but he nodded, trusting him. As the waiter disappeared into the back, the father gently patted his son's hand. "Sometimes," he said, "people will try to tell you who you are not, but you must always remember who you truly are. And tonight they will remember too." The boy sat up a little straighter, wiping his eyes. For the first time since the waiter's insult, he felt a flicker of strength returning. He didn't know what his father planned to do, but he knew he wasn't alone. And as the minutes passed and the waiter returned with the manager in tow, the stage was being set for a revelation that would change the entire room. The restaurant's golden chandeliers still shimmered above, but the atmosphere at the table had shifted completely. What was supposed to be a celebration had turned into an uncomfortable display of arrogance, judgment, and whispered gossip. The boy sat quietly, his hands folded tightly in his lap, as if holding himself together. His father, however, remained calm, his posture steady, his eyes fixed on the space where the waiter had disappeared. The boy tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but his emotions churned. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was angry. Angry that he had been singled out. Angry that people were staring. Angry that this night, his night, had been tainted by a stranger's prejudice. "Dad," he whispered again, leaning forward. "Maybe we should just go somewhere else. Somewhere simpler. Somewhere they don't look at us like we're outsiders." His father's gaze softened, and for a moment, he smiled sadly. He reached across the table and placed his large, warm hand over his son's smaller one. "Listen to me," he said gently, his voice calm yet powerful. "Walking away might feel easier right now, but sometimes leaving isn't the answer. Sometimes you must stay exactly where you are, so the world learns that you will not be moved." The boy blinked, trying to process his father's words. He wanted to believe them, but the weight of the waiter's insult still pressed heavily on his chest. Around the room, diners shifted uncomfortably, pretending to return to their meals while still sneaking glances. Some pitied him, others looked ashamed, but no one had spoken up. Moments later, the waiter returned, this time with the restaurant's manager walking briskly behind him. The manager was a middle-aged man with sharp features, dressed impeccably, in a dark suit. His expression shifted from irritation to surprise as soon as he caught sight of the father seated at the table. The boy noticed it immediately. The manager's eyes widened slightly, his confident stride slowing down as recognition dawned on his face. He straightened his posture, adjusted his tie, and walked with a new air, not arrogance, but respect. The waiter, however, remained smug. He pointed directly at the boy, his voice rising. "There, that's the one. I told you he doesn't belong here. He's disrupting the atmosphere, and frankly, he should be escorted out before it causes more trouble." The father didn't move. He let the waiter's words hang in the air. Then slowly he looked up at the manager, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice steady and controlled. The manager swallowed hard. He shook his head quickly, cutting the waiter off before he could speak again. "No, sir, not at all. There must be a misunderstanding." The waiter blinked, confused. But the manager raised a hand sharply. "Enough. Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" The waiter frowned, his arrogance faltering for the first time. He glanced between the manager and the father, clearly puzzled. "What do you mean? They're just..." His voice trailed off as uncertainty took hold. The father leaned back in his chair, still holding his son's hand. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. Instead, he spoke with the kind of authority that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "This restaurant," he said slowly, "is not just a place where food is served. It is a place where respect should be served alongside every dish. And tonight, I see that lesson has been forgotten." The boy's eyes widened. He had never heard his father's voice carry such weight before. It was as if the entire restaurant had fallen under his command. Even the diners who had been whispering grew silent, their forks pausing mid-air as they listened. The waiter, now visibly nervous, took a step back. I didn't mean..." But before he could finish, the manager spoke firmly. "You've made a grave mistake. This gentleman you just insulted is not a customer you can dismiss. He is the owner of this very restaurant." The words struck like thunder. Gasps echoed around the dining hall. The waiter's mouth fell open, his face draining of color. His smug expression vanished completely, replaced by panic and disbelief. "The owner?" he stammered. The boy turned to look at his father in shock. Until this moment, he had not known the full truth. His father had always been humble, never flaunting his wealth or position. To the boy, his father was simply Dad, the man who helped with homework, who tucked him in at night, who taught him about hard work and respect. But now, sitting in this grand restaurant, the truth unfolded before his very eyes. His father wasn't just any man. He was the man who owned it all. The father finally stood, his tall frame commanding the room. He placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder before addressing the waiter. "You saw a child and judged him. You saw his skin and assumed he didn't belong. You looked at his uniform and thought it wasn't expensive enough. And in your arrogance, you forgot the most important thing. Every person who enters this place deserves dignity." The waiter's lips trembled, his arrogance fully shattered. I didn't know," he whispered. The father's eyes narrowed. "That's the problem. You didn't care to know." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the clinking of glasses and forks had stopped. Every eye was fixed on the father, every ear straining to catch his words. The boy sat up straighter, a swell of pride rising in his chest. The humiliation he had felt moments earlier was slowly being replaced by something else: strength. His father had not yelled, had not raised a fist, had not demanded revenge. Instead, he had chosen dignity, using truth and calm authority as his weapon. The father turned to the diners, his voice carrying through the hall. "Let this be a reminder. Status, money, titles, they mean nothing if we forget our humanity. My son deserves to be here. Every child deserves to dream, to celebrate, to be respected, and no one has the right to take that away." The boy's eyes welled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of pride. For the first time that night, he no longer felt small. He felt seen. He felt valued. The father sat back down, his expression calm once again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the message lingered in the air, heavy and unforgettable. The waiter, trembling, opened his mouth to apologize, but the manager cut in sharply. "Not here, not now, you've said enough." He turned to the father, bowing his head slightly. "Sir, please allow me to personally ensure you and your son have the best service tonight. Everything will be taken care of." But the father shook his head gently. "I don't need special treatment. I only need respect for my son and for every guest who walks through these doors." The boy smiled faintly, gripping his father's hand tighter. In that moment he understood what true strength looked like. It wasn't about wealth or power. It was about dignity. And as the meal began, as dishes were finally brought to their table with trembling hands and careful service, the boy realized something important. His father had not only defended him, he had taught him a lesson that would stay with him forever. The restaurant hall, once filled with casual laughter and elegant chatter, had transformed into a theater of silence. The chandeliers above still glittered, but the sparkle in the room now came from something else, the weight of truth hanging heavy in the air. The boy sat at the table, his chest rising and falling as he replayed the manager's words. "This man is the owner of this very restaurant." He couldn't stop glancing at his father. It was as though he was seeing him for the first time, as though layers of mystery had just been peeled away. All those times his father worked late, all those meetings he never explained, the boy had assumed it was just business, something distant, something ordinary. But now he realized that the man sitting calmly beside him wasn't just a father who cared for his family. He was a leader, a creator, the very foundation of the elegant space that others had tried to push him out of. The waiter's face was pale, his earlier arrogance completely replaced with dread. His hands shook slightly, the tray he carried earlier long forgotten. He had insulted the very person who signed his paycheck, the man who built the place he worked in. But more than that, he had insulted the man's child. The father looked at his son, his calm eyes speaking louder than words. "You see now, you belong here no matter what anyone says." The manager stepped forward, bowing slightly again. "Sir," he began, his voice low and respectful, "if I had known you were coming, we would have prepared." The father raised a hand, cutting him off. His voice was calm but firm. "This evening is not about me. It is about him." He nodded toward his son. "And about the lesson he will carry with him for the rest of his life." The boy's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to thank his father, but the words stuck. Instead, he sat quietly, listening as his father's steady voice carried across the hall. "To everyone here," the father said, his tone rising slightly, "let this moment be a reminder. Status does not grant you the right to look down on others. Wealth does not excuse cruelty and ignorance." He paused, his eyes locking on the waiter. "Ignorance is no shield against accountability." Several diners shifted in their seats, nodding silently. A woman at the back dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. A man in a business suit murmured, "He's right," to no one in particular. The waiter swallowed hard, stepping back as though the father's words physically pushed him. His earlier smirk, his dismissive tone, his belief that he held power, all of it was gone. He was no longer the one in control. The father's voice softened, though it still carried strength. "When I built this restaurant, I didn't build it just for the wealthy. I built it for families celebrating milestones, for friends gathering to share laughter, for strangers to sit at a table and feel respected. That is what this place should stand for." And yet tonight, my own son was treated as if he did not belong. The boy's eyes widened, his chest swelling with both pride and sadness. He had been hurt, yes, but now he understood something far greater. His father had built this place not just with money, but with values. And those values had been violated. The father sat back down slowly, resting his hand on his son's shoulder. Again. "We will eat here tonight," he said quietly to the manager, "but not because we need to prove a point. We will eat here because my son deserves to see that no insult, no judgment, and no prejudice can take away his dignity." The boy finally found his voice. "Dad," he whispered, Why didn't you tell me before? Why didn't you say this was yours? His father smiled faintly. Because ownership is not what makes you belong, son. You belong here because you are you. Whether I own this place or not, you had every right to sit at this table tonight. The boy blinked back tears. The lesson sank deep into his heart. Belonging wasn't about wealth or status. It was about knowing your worth even when others failed to see it. The waiter, still trembling, stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, I am so sorry, he stammered, his voice cracked with fear and shame. I didn't realize. I judged without thinking. Please forgive me. The father studied him for a long moment. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what he would do. He could have fired the waiter on the spot. He could have humiliated him the way the man had humiliated his son. But instead, he spoke with quiet authority. You see my son? He asked the waiter. The man nodded, nervously. Then I want you to apologize to him, not to me. The waiter's eyes darted to the boy who sat frozen in his chair. Slowly the man lowered his head. I'm sorry, he said softly. I was wrong. I should never have spoken to you that way. You do belong here. Please. Forgive me. The boy didn't know what to say. A part of him wanted to stay silent, to let the waiter feel the weight of his mistake. But another part of him, the part his father had nurtured, understood the power of forgiveness. He took a deep breath, his small voice breaking the silence. I forgive you, he said. The father's eyes softened with pride. That was the lesson he had hoped his son would learn, not just to stand tall in the face of insult, but to rise above it with grace. The manager clapped his hands gently, summoning another waiter to serve the father and son. Plates of the finest dishes were brought to their table, steaks glistening with flavor, bread warm from the oven, glasses filled with sparkling juice, for the boy and wine for the father. As they ate, the father leaned closer to his son. You see, son, sometimes people will see only the surface. They will not see your heart, your hard work, or your dreams. But that does not make you less. Never let their ignorance define your worth. The boy nodded, savoring not just the food, but the lesson that would stay with him forever. Around the restaurant, conversations slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. People spoke more quietly, with more thought. They looked at the boy differently now, not with judgment, but with respect. Some even smiled warmly in his direction, as though silently apologizing for staying quiet earlier. For the boy, the night was no longer about the insult he had endured. It was about the strength his father had shown. It was about the lesson of dignity, respect, and the quiet power of truth. And as he finished his meal, he realized something even greater. This wasn't just his father's restaurant. This was his legacy, too. One day he would carry it forward, not just with ownership, but with the values that made it truly special. The waiter, meanwhile, stood quietly in the corner, still shaken. He had learned a lesson, too, a lesson that would follow him far longer than any shift at the restaurant. A lesson about humility, respect, and the danger of judging others without knowing their story. The night was not what the boy had expected, but in the end it was exactly what he needed. The restaurant buzzed softly once again as diners resumed their meals, though the air carried something different now. Respect, reflection. The weight of what had just taken place still lingered, like a quiet song in the background. The boy sat taller in his chair, his earlier humiliation fading into something brighter, pride, not just in himself, but in his father. The waiter stood off to the side, still pale, still trembling with the aftermath of his mistake. The manager hovered nearby, making sure every detail of service was perfect now, as though perfection could erase what had happened earlier. But the truth was clear. No polished plate or sparkling glass could undo the sting of those words. The father, however, didn't seem focused on the food. He cut into his meal slowly, his movements calm, deliberate. He wasn't eating for taste, alone. He was creating a moment, Every pause, every word he was about to speak was going to become part of his son's memory. "Son," he said, his voice low but strong enough to reach beyond their table. The boy looked up, meeting his father's steady eyes. "You saw what happened tonight," the father continued. "You saw how quickly a man can use his words to wound. But I want you to understand something. Dignity is not given by others. It cannot be taken away by their insults. Dignity comes from within, and it grows when you choose not to let others destroy it." The boy nodded, his young mind trying to hold on to every syllable. He wanted to etch this moment into his heart, forever. His father leaned back slightly, glancing around the dining hall where eyes once again had turned toward him. "Respect is not about wealth. It is not about titles. It is about humanity," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry. "Every person deserves to walk into a place and feel welcome. But tonight, my son was told he did not belong." Murmurs rose from some of the guests. A woman near the window shook her head sadly. A man whispered, "He's right," to his companion. The waiter looked down at his shoes, shame written across his face. The father continued, his words flowing like a teacher addressing a classroom. "Let me tell you something I learned long ago. Anger is easy. Retaliation is easy. But strength, true strength, lies in choosing dignity over rage. It lies in standing firm without lowering yourself to the level of those who try to pull you down." He placed his fork gently on his plate and turned back to his son. "When someone tries to make you feel small, remember this night. Remember how quickly ignorance collapses when truth is revealed. And most of all, remember that you are worthy. Worthy of respect, worthy of kindness, worthy of every place your hard work takes you." The boy felt his chest swell. His father's voice, calm yet powerful, was like armor being placed over his heart. He realized that his father wasn't just defending him, he was preparing him for the world beyond this restaurant, a world where unfair judgment could appear at any corner. The waiter, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. "Sir, please, I beg you," he said softly, his voice cracking. "I know I cannot undo what I've said. I humiliated your son, and I disgraced this restaurant. If you wish, I will resign tonight." The room stilled again. The boy's eyes darted to his father. He half expected his dad to accept the resignation, to punish the waiter for the pain he had caused. But the father shook his head slowly. "No," he said firmly. "Leaving would be the easy way out. What you need is not escape but growth. You must face what you've done, learn from it, and promise never to repeat it. I do not want revenge. I want change." The words hit harder than any punishment. The waiter's shoulders sagged as tears filled his eyes. You are more merciful than I deserve," he whispered. The boy sat stunned. His father had every right to end the man's career in that moment, but instead he had chosen to turn the mistake into a lesson, not just for the waiter but for everyone watching. The father raised his glass, not in arrogance but as a gesture of resolve. "This restaurant," he said, "will never be about exclusion. It will never be about arrogance. It will be about respect, for all." The diners broke into soft applause, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Some clapped because they agreed, others because they were moved, and a few because they knew they had stayed silent when they should have spoken earlier. The boy felt a rush of warmth in his chest. This was no longer a night of humiliation. It was becoming a night of transformation. His father had turned the cruelest words into the most powerful lesson he had ever witnessed. As the applause faded, the father leaned close to his son again. "Do you see now?" he asked quietly. The boy nodded eagerly, his voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Dad, I see. Dignity isn't about what others say. It's about what we choose to be." A proud smile spread across his father's face. "Exactly." The rest of their meal passed peacefully, but the weight of the moment lingered. Every bite of food tasted different now, not just rich with flavor, but seasoned with the taste of victory, of lesson, of quiet strength. For the boy, The restaurant was no longer just a place of chandeliers and silverware. It had become a classroom, and his father was the greatest teacher he had ever known. And as the night drew to a close, as they rose from their seats and walked past the same tables where judgmental eyes had once burned holes into him, the boy noticed something remarkable. This time people didn't look at him with disdain. They looked at him with respect. Some even nodded in silent acknowledgement, as though to say, "We see you now." The boy held his head high. He had walked in feeling small. He was walking out carrying a lesson that would last a lifetime. The night had stretched long, but the restaurant glowed brighter than ever. The boy sat back in his chair, his small chest filled with something he had never experienced before. He had walked in feeling excited, then crushed by humiliation, but now he was leaving with something far more powerful: pride, dignity, and wisdom. His father had turned the harshness of a waiter's insult into the richest lesson of his life, but the night wasn't done yet. As their meal came to a close, the father dabbed his mouth with a white napkin and glanced around the hall. The chandeliers shimmered softly, casting golden halos on polished plates. The hum of conversation had returned, but it wasn't the same. People no longer whispered behind their hands. They were speaking openly, with a kind of thoughtfulness, as though the father's words had unlocked something in their minds. The boy noticed how many eyes still followed his father, some with admiration, some with shame, and some with the quiet hunger of people who had just realized they had more to learn about life. The waiter, the man who had caused the entire storm, remained near the back of the hall. His posture was no longer arrogant. His chin wasn't lifted high in false superiority. Instead, he stood with his shoulders bowed, his hands clasped together, his eyes lowered. Every few minutes he glanced toward the boy and his father, guilt etched deep into his face. The boy shifted uncomfortably. He still remembered the sting of those words. "You don't belong here." They had cut into him like a blade. But he also remembered his father's voice, calm and steady. Dignity is not given by others. It cannot be taken away by their insults. Dignity comes from within. As the waiter lingered, the boy's heart wrestled between anger and compassion. Finally, the father stood. The hall fell quiet again, as though every diner instinctively knew he had more to say. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, steady and reassuring. "My son," he began, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "Tonight you saw the world at its worst and at its best. You saw how quickly people can judge, and you saw how truth can change hearts. But there is one final lesson you must carry with you." The boy looked up, his eyes wide, ready to listen. The father glanced toward the waiter, motioning him forward. Hesitant, trembling, the man stepped closer. Each step seemed heavy, as though his shame weighed down his body. He stopped just a few feet from the table, his face pale, his lips pressed tightly together. "This man," the father said calmly, "wronged you. He insulted you without reason. But now he stands before you, humbled. The question is not whether he deserves forgiveness, it is whether you will choose to give it." The boy's throat tightened. Everyone in the room leaned forward, waiting. The waiter swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Young man, I cannot undo what I said. I cannot erase the shame I caused you. But I can promise you this. I will never again treat another child or another person with the disrespect I showed you tonight. I was blind to my own arrogance. Please, forgive me." The boy sat in silence. His mind swirled with emotions. Part of him wanted to turn away, to let the waiter feel the weight of guilt forever. But then he remembered the strength in his father's voice, the lesson of dignity. Forgiveness was not weakness. It was power. It was the ability to rise above, to break the chain of anger, and to replace hatred with hope. Slowly, the boy stood. He was shorter than the waiter, but in that moment he felt taller than anyone in the room. He looked into the man's eyes and said softly, "I forgive you." Gasps rippled through the hall. Some diners clapped their hands together instinctively. Others whispered, "Amazing." Such wisdom for a child. The father smiled proudly, his eyes glistening with emotion. That, he said, is strength, not fists, not revenge, but forgiveness. The waiter dropped his head, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Thank you for giving me a chance to change. The father nodded. Go and prove it. Not to me, not even to my son, but to yourself. Live differently. Treat others with respect no matter who they are. The waiter bowed deeply before retreating. He wasn't just leaving a table. He was leaving behind his arrogance, his ignorance, his old self. The boy sat back down, his hands trembling from the weight of what he had just done. His father leaned close and whispered, You will remember this moment forever. Tonight you learned how to stand tall and how to lift others even when they tried to drag you down. That is true power. The boy nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I understand, Dad. The diners, still buzzing with admiration, began to clap again. Not a slow ripple this time, but a wave of applause that filled the entire restaurant. Some stood, others raised their glasses. They weren't just celebrating the owner of the restaurant, they were celebrating the father, the son, and the lesson they had all just received. The father lifted his glass slightly in acknowledgement, but he didn't bask in the attention. He simply smiled and placed his hand over his son's, sharing the moment quietly, personally, as though the rest of the world didn't matter. A new legacy. Later that night, as they stepped outside into the cool evening air, the boy looked up at the glowing sign above the restaurant. He had walked under that sign many times before, never realizing it represented his father's vision. But now it meant something deeper. Dad, he said softly, one day when I'm older, I want to make this place even better. Not just the food, but the way people feel when they walk in. I want everyone to know they belong. The father's chest swelled with pride. He placed an arm around his son's shoulders and pulled him close. And you will, son, because tonight you showed more wisdom than many adults. This place will one day be yours, not just to own, but to shape with. The values you've learned. The boy smiled, his heart glowing. He had come to the restaurant expecting a meal. He was leaving with a mission. The waiters change. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, the waiter sat alone in the staff room, his head buried in his hands. His arrogance, once as sharp as a blade, now felt like poison in his chest. But instead of despair, he felt something new, hope. The boy's forgiveness had given him a second chance. He promised himself then and there, never again. Never again would he judge someone by their appearance, their skin, or their clothing. From that day forward, he would serve every guest with dignity. He would rebuild himself, one respectful action at a time. And he would never forget the boy's eyes, the eyes that forgave when he least deserved it. The moral that lived. On news of the incident spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. Diners who had witnessed it told their friends, their families, their colleagues. The story of a father, his son, and a waiter's mistake became a tale of transformation. It wasn't just about ownership or wealth or power. It was about humanity. Some, who had been silent that night, confessed later that they regretted not speaking up sooner. But even they carried the lesson forward. Next time, they vowed, they would stand for what was right. The boy, however, carried the lesson deepest of all. For years to come, whenever he faced insults, judgment, or doubt, he would remember his father's words. Dignity cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered, and we do not surrender. Closing reflections. That night, a luxury restaurant became something more. It became a place where a boy discovered his strength, where a father showed the world what leadership meant, and where a waiter learned the meaning of humility. It became a story not just for one family, but for everyone who heard it, a reminder that respect is the foundation of humanity, that forgiveness is the ultimate power, and that no child should ever feel they don't belong. The boy went to sleep that night with a smile, not because of the food or the chandeliers, but because He had witnessed transformation. His own, his father's, the waiter's, and even the hearts of strangers. And as his father kissed him goodnight, he whispered one final truth. Son, tonight you saw that dignity is the most expensive thing a man can carry. And the best part? It doesn't cost a single penny.